Part 1. Chapter 1. Background to the project. There are a number of experiences over the years which have led me to carry out this small report into the tradition of blind acupuncturists in Japan. First, I should tell the reader a little bit about myself. I am British, and I trained to become an acupuncturist in the UK at the University of Westminster. I trained originally in the Chinese system of acupuncture and then followed up with a postgraduate training in the Japanese meridian therapy and Toya Hari system of acupuncture. I spent a few years in Japan and I currently practice acupuncture in London, UK. Also, I am sighted. I first encountered blind acupuncturists when I attended the 9th Nihon Kishinpo Gakai Joint Acupuncture Seminar in Kyoto in 2009. This was a meeting of acupuncture groups from all over Japan that came together to practice and study together. I had been invited by my acupuncture teacher, Masahiro Honda, a regional teacher of the Ki Shinpo Society, a meridian therapy organization. At the time, the organization was headed by Mr. Shiomi and many other teachers and facilitated by Kawai Kuwahara, a teacher in the US who had brought a group of Western students over from America. At the end of the seminar, we had the common celebratory leaving party. It was a large meal in a hall with speeches and copious amounts of alcohol. It was my first experience of seeing blind acupuncturists. One of them seemed to be of importance and was closely attended by 2 of his apprentices, young men who clearly held him in high esteem and put the comforts of their master ahead of their own. They followed him around and helped him with all his needs. The other blind acupuncturist I met was a loud fellow and became more boisterous the more he drank, which added to the merriment of the evening. He was particularly animated when he met the few foreigners in the hall. It was my first encounter with blind acupuncturists and very memorable. Over time, I discovered that my teacher, Mr. Honda, was himself taught by Mr. Kodo Fukushima, a very key figure in Japanese acupuncture in the modern era. Kodo Fukushima was also blind. A few years later, I met again with some more senior blind acupuncturists when I attended the European Toya Hari Japanese Acupuncture Seminar in East London in 2012. Acupuncturists from all over Europe came from the 3-day weekend. It was led by 3 senior-level acupuncturists from Japan, Mr. Abe, Mr. Taniguchi, and Mr. Kasumi, who instructed, supervised, and taught Japanese Toya Hari acupuncture techniques. Mr. Abe and Mr. Taniguchi were both blind. Due to my previous experience in Japan and being a resident of London, I was tasked with entertaining the teachers on the 3rd night of the workshop. They had expressed an interest in eating traditional fish and chips and also going to a British pub for a pint. After finding a suitable pub that sold traditional pub meals such as fish and chips and which did not play loud music, I took the teachers across East London, supported by a close classmate and my wife. Fortunately, the teachers were satisfied with both the food and the beer. I had always been curious as to the experiences of these blind acupuncture teachers. I wondered how it was that Japan had become a country where the blind could train and practice to become acupuncturists and that they could run successful businesses. This book will give some basic explanation as to why this is the case. Before continuing, it is worth explaining some basic concepts for people that do not have a background in traditional Asian medicine. What is acupuncture? Acupuncture is a very old system of traditional medicine which originated in China and was later introduced to Korea and Japan. In Japan, acupuncture has evolved in its own unique way. Acupuncture involves the stimulation of specific points on the body called acupuncture points or acupoints, using needles to create a beneficial effect. These acupoints run along a network of channel pathways. These channel pathways traverse the entire body, running from the tips of the fingers and toes, along the arms and the legs, through the torso, both front and back, and travelling to the head. There are over 365 recognised acupoints on the body. These acupoints can also be stimulated with other methods, such as Moc Sebastian or massage. In modern-day acupuncture practice, sterile filiform-sized needles are often inserted into these acupuncture points in the muscles. These needles can be inserted from a few millimeters to several inches deep, depending on where in the body they are needled and the size of the muscles. As with inserting any foreign object into the body, there is the potential for damage to the internal organs or other structures, and so it is important that it is carried out by a properly qualified practitioner. Most acupuncture training programs take 3 years and consist of academic study, exams, hands-on practice and clinical practice treating patients under the supervision of an experienced practitioner. Central to the theory of acupuncture is the concept of ki or chi. Ki is the Japanese word. Chi is the Chinese pronunciation. In this book, I will use the words ki and chi interchangeably, as they are the same. In the context of the human body, basically ki refers to a type of energy that runs through the channels of the body and which powers the functions of the body. Sickness is said to come from an imbalance of the flow of qi in the channels. One of the purposes of acupuncture is to harmonize the flow of qi energy by stimulating the acupoints with needles, massage, or Moc Sebastian. This is a simple explanation. There are other books that can explain traditional Oriental medicine in more detail for the interested reader. Moc Sebastian. Moc Sebastian, also known as moxa or oku, is an adjunct to acupuncture. It involves the burning of a plant called mugwort or Artemisia vulgaris, either directly or indirectly on the acupuncture points or on regions of the body to create a beneficial effect. Moc Sebastian can be very helpful for musculoskeletal complaints as it can help relax tight muscles. As Moc Sebastian involves the use of fire in close proximity to the skin, it must be carried out carefully by a properly trained and qualified practitioner due to the risk of burning. Massage. Everyone is familiar to some extent with massage. It involves manipulation of the muscular tissues, often using pressing with the fingers or thumbs or rubbing. It can be carried out undressed with oil or fully dressed. There are various methods and systems. In Japan, the main systems of massage are Anma and Shiatsu. Anma massage is believed to have been derived from the traditional Chinese system of massage called Tui-na, which first came to Japan during the Nara period. Anma developed in Japan in the 14th century and became a regulated profession for the blind. In popular culture and movies, the blind swordsman Zatoichi primarily made his living by practicing Anma. Anma utilizes techniques such as rubbing, pressing, stroking, kneading, and tapping. The acupoints and channels are treated. Anma massage and acupuncture are both taught together in blind schools. Shiatsu, meaning finger pressure, is a form of Japanese bodywork. Massage techniques incorporate pressure using the fingers, thumbs, feet, palms, and assisted stretching. Treatments can be carried out on the floor or a treatment couch and involve thumb or finger pressure on a pattern of certain points on the body to relieve pain, help relax, and stimulate blood and lymph flow. Shiatsu evolved from Anma. One of the most influential figures in Shiatsu was Tokujiro Namikoshi, who founded a Shiatsu college in the 1940s. Since then, Shiatsu has grown to be recognized worldwide. Some significant differences between Chinese TCM acupuncture and Japanese acupuncture. As this book is going to discuss the tradition of blind acupuncturists in Japan, it is worth highlighting some of the differences between the Chinese TCM and Japanese acupuncture systems, as it is relevant to understanding how blind acupuncturists in Japan are able to adapt their practice to work around their loss of sight. Chinese acupuncture. Today, the Chinese acupuncture system known as traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, is the most common system in the West. It is typified by the use of thicker needles and deeper insertions. In a treatment, many needles are used, and it is not unusual for up to 30 needles to be inserted in a single session. Needles are usually retained for up to an hour. There can also sometimes be stronger needling sensation. Needles are often inserted quite deeply. The Chinese TCM system is typically taught in most mainstream acupuncture schools in the UK, Europe, and in the USA. Most people in the UK who have had acupuncture will have most likely experienced a Chinese acupuncture treatment or a variation of it. It may be noted that the typical TCM method of acupuncture may not be suitable for blind acupuncturists to utilize, simply because they may have difficulty to judge the correct depth to needle. The risk of using too many needles in a single treatment means needles could possibly be forgotten and left in the body. Also, the method of stronger needle stimulation, which involves repeated twirling, lifting, and thrusting of the needle in the body, can occasionally lead to minor bruises or bleeding, which may not be noticed by a blind practitioner. It is possibly for these reasons that the acupuncture practiced in Japan by blind practitioners is significantly different and more adapted to their needs, with gentler techniques and a greater emphasis on palpation. Japanese acupuncture. There are several different systems of Japanese acupuncture, such as meridian therapy, Toya Hari, shakuju, manica, and others. Japanese acupuncture uses the same theories and acupuncture points as Chinese acupuncture. However, the methodology, tools, and techniques are different enough to differentiate it as its own separate system. Several Japanese systems utilize a softer needling technique, the use of thinner gauge needles, and little or no needling stimulation. Needles can be inserted deeply or very shallowly. In some cases, a form of contact needling is practiced, where a needle is held on the acupoint on the skin but not inserted into the body. Fewer needles are used, and stages of needling may be broken down more concisely. For example, in meridian therapy, a root treatment stage of treatment may simply involve the use of a single needle on an acupoint. After the root treatment is finished, a branch treatment stage is carried out, often with the support of a clinic assistant or apprentice, who may carry out either moxa or further gentle needling or light massage. In the case of a blind acupuncture clinic, the root treatment will typically be carried out by the blind acupuncturist, as it is deemed to be the most important and active part of the treatment, and the branch treatment will be carried out by the sighted assistant, as it is believed to be a supportive part of the main treatment. Typically, more time is spent on palpating, which is examining the body by touch, and assessing the condition of the body in Japanese acupuncture. For example, in meridian therapy, the pulses in the wrist are checked before and several times throughout the treatment, and particularly after needling. The speed, strength, and rhythm of the wrist pulse has diagnostic significance in traditional Oriental medicine. This is so the practitioner can assess whether a positive change has occurred after needling. There is also more palpation of the body, the acupoints, and also the abdomen to judge the condition of the body. These gentler techniques in Japanese acupuncture are very likely due to the influence of blind practitioners on the development of acupuncture in the country. The emphasis on the use of palpation in diagnosing the body suits blind acupuncturists, who will have to rely on obtaining information about the patient's body from touch as well as asking questions. The lighter needling or contact needling techniques means there is less risk to the body by deep needling or damage to internal structures. However, some blind acupuncturists do practice deep needling. Another distinction is the gauge, that is, the thickness of needles. Thinner gauge needles can be less painful and possibly cause less risk of bruising. Another important factor is the use of a device called the guide tube, a small hollow tube that is slightly smaller than the length of the acupuncture needle. The acupuncture needle is placed in the guide tube and placed over the acupuncture point on the body. As the needle is of a slightly longer length than the tube, it extends out of it. The needle can be then tapped and inserted shallowly into the body, entering no more than a few millimeters. The use of a guide tube allows an almost painless insertion and also means that a needle can be needled at a shallow depth without the risk of needling too deeply. The guide tube was invented by a blind acupuncturist called Wachi Sugiyama, who will be discussed later in this book. Blind acupuncturists in Japan. As I mentioned in my introduction, I had encountered and learnt from blind acupuncturists on a few occasions previously, but these encounters did not truly reflect the large number of blind people working in the field of acupuncture. To come to a better understanding of the numbers of blind people practicing acupuncture in Japan, it is necessary to check the website for the Japan Federation of the Blind, Nichimo. The website is written in Japanese, but has statistics for the number of visually impaired people in Japan that practice massage in acupuncture and moxa. In Japan, the industry of anma, i.e. massage, hari, meaning acupuncture, and Q, moxa, is abbreviated as AHA ki or ahaki by the Japan Federation of the Blind. Unfortunately, there are no current statistics available, but in a major survey of the working population of visually impaired people in 2006, 24,000 people out of 81,000, or 29.4%, worked in the field of ahaki. Kodo Fukushima and the Toya Hari Association. In the current age, one of the primary acupuncture groups for blind people is the Toya Hari Medical Association, which was founded by a famous blind acupuncturist of the modern age called Kodo Fukushima. I will talk a bit more about Fukushima in part 2. The Toya Hari Association was founded in 1959, originally to train blind acupuncturists in the acupuncture system of meridian therapy. However, membership was opened up to include sighted practitioners and foreigners. Today, there are over 1,000 members. Many of the organization's senior teachers have been blind. It should be noted that not all blind acupuncturists are members of the Toya Hari Association. There are other systems, groups, and acupuncture organizations in Japan. As part of this project, I interviewed some of the more senior members of the Toya Hari Medical Association. Blind acupuncturists in the West. Before embarking on this project, I wanted to find out if there were already any blind acupuncturists practicing in the UK or elsewhere in the West. In the UK, blind people are able to train to become physiotherapists, but so far there is no training program for blind people to learn acupuncture. Internet searches brought up some sources. I found an article in a local newspaper about a blind acupuncturist from Japan who had moved to the UK, but who had struggled to find work and to travel. Here is the article. Blind Japanese acupuncturist Constant Lee from Enfield Town appeals for more volunteers. Enfield Independent, March 2012. By David Hardiman. A blind woman who was shocked at how difficult it was for her to travel around London after moving from Japan has called for more volunteers to help the disabled. Constance Lee, who moved from Tokyo to Enfield Town last April, following the earthquake and tsunami that devastated Japan, said that getting trains and buses was far harder for people with disabilities than in her native country. The 53-year-old receives help one day a month from an Enfield Association for the Blind volunteer to fill in forms and seek an acupuncture job in Enfield, but the organisation has such a long waiting list it cannot help more. Mrs. Lee said, "Last year when the tsunami hit, I decided to come over here to be with my family, but I found that despite its reputation for welfare, in Britain it was quite difficult to get around. People will always help if you ask, but on the overground trains they don't announce the stations, and it makes it hard to know where you are. I've been on a few buses that were going to the wrong destination. I think people should volunteer more. If you've had help, you know how valuable it is." The Singapore-born woman first came to London in 1980 to train as a physiotherapist before winning a scholarship in Japan to become an acupuncturist despite her sight loss. But after 8 years of long-distance commuting, incredibly she kept up her job 6,000 miles away in Tokyo. Despite marrying her British husband 8 years ago, she decided to move permanently to London after the earthquake disaster last March, which killed at least 15,000 people. Volunteer Services Manager Christina Hind said that blind people needed help getting to the shops, dealing with post, and handling phone calls. She added, "Not all of our home visit clients face such daunting challenges as Constance, but they all need weekly or fortnightly support for an hour and a half to assist with everyday tasks." After reading this article, I attempted to track Constance down. I even contacted the charity that she had been supported by, but was not able to ascertain if she was still in the UK or had returned to work in Japan. With these challenges, I would not be surprised if Constance had returned back to Japan to work. I think she summed up well the difficulties of being blind and trying to work in London. Across the pond in North America, I came across a couple of examples of blind acupuncturists practicing. One good example can be found in a YouTube video which shows David Kinley of Clark, USA, a blind acupuncturist who has been running a busy practice for 30 years. The video shows David inserting numerous needles into a patient's face using a guide tube. His patient is completely relaxed. In contrast with this is the case of Juliana Combo, a blind young lady who had undergone a number of barriers in order to train and obtain her acupuncture qualification. After completing her acupuncture training at a sighted school, she was then denied her acupuncture license due to her disability. Fortunately, she was able to get the decision overturned, albeit with certain restrictions placed on her. Here is an article about her written in Japan Today, an online acupuncture journal. Blind acupuncturist sees bright future ahead of her. Juliana Combo granted license to practice in Texas by editorial staff. Last April, Acupuncture Today reported on the case of Juliana Combo, a blind acupuncturist in Texas seeking her license to practice. Combo had graduated with a master's degree from the Academy of Oriental Medicine at Austin, or AOMA, and had passed her national exams. In February 2008, the Texas State Board of Acupuncture Examiners ruled that due to her lack of sight, she could not be properly licensed without further observation. At that time, the appeals board ruled Combo had to be evaluated by a neutral physician and an acupuncturist not affiliated with AOMA, as she worked on the one male and one female patient. The observers were then tasked to report back to the licensure committee within 6 months as to whether Combo should be granted a license. On June 7, 2008, the board finally handed down its recommendation. Combo will be granted a license for 3 years, with certain restrictions attached. She will not be allowed to practice alone and will have to be in a group or hospital setting. She also will have to report to the state any time she inadvertently sticks herself with a needle while practicing. She also will not be allowed to practice on patients with visual impairments without the presence of a sighted staff member, such as another acupuncturist or nurse. Under Texas state law, Combo may request that the restrictions be lifted after 1 year. One of her strongest champions has been Will Morris, president of AOMA. In an interview with the Austin Statesman after the decision was handed down, Morris stated, "Juliana Combo is qualified and safe to practice. She has shouldered this burden for all persons who are ably challenged." Acupuncture Today, August 2008, Volume 9, Issue 8. Though there have been clearly some inroads for blind people being able to train, qualify and work as acupuncturists in the West, it is certainly not as developed as Japan, as this book will show. Acupuncture as a profession for the blind in Japan. From the 2006 survey conducted by the Ministry of Health, Labour and Welfare, there are an estimated 24,000 blind people working in the field of acupuncture, moxotherapy and massage in Japan. There are around 57 blind schools in Japan that teach acupuncture as part of their syllabus. 2 of these are private. Japan occupies a unique position in the world as having a significant number of blind people working in Oriental medicine. There are a few key historic events which have created this tradition. One of the first major influences came from the blind acupuncturist Waichi Tsugiyama in the late 1600s, who laid the way for the opening up of acupuncture schools for the blind. The second event occurred during the Meiji Restoration, when all things old and traditional were systematically being replaced with all things new and scientific. In the late 1800s, 2 decrees and a law were passed which restricted the practice of acupuncture only to Western-trained physicians. However, due to protests by blind acupuncturists and their supporters who feared that their entire livelihood was at risk, an exception was made allowing blind people to continue to practice acupuncture. A third event occurred following the Second World War, when General MacArthur attempted to ban acupuncture in Japan during the US occupation. Again, it was the pressure of blind acupuncturists and their supporters that allowed an exception to be made to allow the blind to practice. These 3 key events have allowed Japanese acupuncture to survive as an occupation for the blind. Inadvertently, they have even allowed for the survival of acupuncture as a profession for the sighted up until the modern age. Today, blind practitioners can work alongside sighted practitioners in clinics, in hospitals, or work in private practice. They hold the same acupuncture licenses and charge and earn the same wages as sighted practitioners. Blind students can learn acupuncture in specialized acupuncture schools where the majority of teachers are sighted, or they have the option to train in one of several state-sponsored regional blind schools where the majority of teachers are blind. Does being blind convey advantages for acupuncturists? In writing this article, the question is always in my mind whether blind people have an advantage in acupuncture, particularly when it comes to palpation and finding acupuncture points. It could be argued that blind people are more sensitive because they have to rely less on sight and therefore develop their other senses more to compensate. Such an idea is popularized in movies like Satoichi, the blind swordsman who could sense enemies about to attack him from behind, and then suddenly he would strike and kill them dead in one move. He too was a massage practitioner. Brain plasticity in blind people. There is a body of scientific research to show that brain plasticity, or neural rewiring, and sensory substitution occurs in individuals who suffer any form of sensory deprivation, such as blindness or deafness. When a person becomes blind, they do not lose the ability to see. Instead, the ability to transmit the sensory signal from eye to the brain is lost. Whilst the communication between the retina and the optic nerve with the brain may be blocked, it is the visual centre of the brain which is ultimately responsible for forming an image, and has been found that a blind person is still able to create a subjective image using information gathered from the other senses, particularly touch or listening. Other examples of sensory substitution is the act of reading through the fingers using Braille. Also, when a blind person uses a cane, the point of contact with the objects, such as the cane touching the tactile ridges on the ground, provides key information on the environment and acts as an extension of the senses. If we replace the cane with the needle, it is logical to assume that a blind acupuncturist can pick up all manner of information from the patient simply through contact with a needle, particularly as regards to feeling the correct acupuncture point or even the presence of qi, energy. It has also been found that tactile sensitivity, the sense of touch, is higher in blind people. In one study, Tactile acuity is enhanced in blindness. From the Journal of Neuroscience, 90 subjects were tested on their ability to discern the orientation of grooved surfaces by pressing into it with the index finger. It was found that passive tactile acuity was significantly superior in blind subjects compared to sighted subjects. In the field of acupuncture or any type of bodywork therapy, developed tactile sensitivity is a benefit, particularly when it comes to palpating channels and acupuncture points. For example, in traditional Japanese acupuncture, a lot of emphasis is placed on finding the correct location of the acupuncture point as being the deciding factor on whether a treatment is successful or not. The famous Japanese acupuncturist Shudo Denmai talks about the active point and how acupuncture points can express different qualities like abnormal temperature, abnormal moisture, congestions, depressions, and indurations. Fundamentally, finding the correct acupuncture point does require a sensitive touch. The palpation and interpretation of the wrist pulses is also a skill that doesn't require sight. Assessing the patient. In traditional acupuncture, successful diagnosis is carried out using specific methods of examination. These are looking, listening, smelling, questioning, and palpating. Whilst the lack of one of these diagnostic methods may cause some inconvenience for a practitioner, it does not necessarily stop the practitioner from building up an accurate picture of the client. A good example of this can be found in an article in the field of physiotherapy from the British Journal of Visual Impairment called Working the Blind Side, or One Visually Impaired Physiotherapist's Evaluation of the Patient, by Peter Price, a blind physiotherapist practicing in the UK. I go out into the waiting room, call the name, and this is where the audible cues start. The ears are suddenly working overtime. Does the patient groan or wince? Is there a slowness of approach or a limp or a pronounced breathlessness? Then it's the quality of the voice. The timbre hints at the optimism or their hesitation or tiredness or even sometimes depression. It is while the patient is undressing that the olfactory clues come into play. The smoker really gives himself away. Certain drugs give a smell away, a sort of earthy smell from barbiturate takers. There are the different smells of perspiration from the various sweat glands. Touch is the most critical and reciprocal for the physiotherapist and patient. Touch picks up physical features like posture, skin texture, scars, muscle tone, muscle spasm, and joint swelling. For the patient, it's the practitioner's touch that instills or destroys confidence and shows whether there is a hands-on and caring attitude or not. I recall one patient who said to me, "I went to the doctor and he never even touched me." Although this account is from a different field to acupuncture, it demonstrates how a blind therapist is able to build an in-depth picture of the patient and, in some ways, pick up information that could be missed by a sighted practitioner. This information does suggest that being blind may convey advantages to blind acupuncturists. In order to explore this, I included it as one of my questions when interviewing senior practitioners. The experiences of Peter Price working as a blind physiotherapist are similar to how Juliana Combo, the blind acupuncturist from the USA, uses an adaptive method to practice. In an article from the North American Journal of Oriental Medicine, NAJOM, she explained how she works. Having lost my sight at the age of 10, I had several teachers who specialized in adaptive learning methods. In these classes, I learned methods to function independently in a sighted world. Skills that I mastered included traveling, cooking, and creating ways to adapt to my environment. Additionally, I was an elite athlete for several years, applying adaptive techniques to competitive swimming. As an undergraduate student, I also relied on my experience and knowledge of adaptive training. As an acupuncturist, I applied these adaptive skills to my studies and practice. For example, in order to determine the size and general mobility of an individual, I use techniques such as walking with the patient while holding on to their arm at the elbow. This allows me to know how tall the individual is and how they walk, among other things. In the blind community, it is called sighted guide, a method of travel for blind individuals when a white cane or dog guide is not employed. Having been blind for over 20 years, I have walked sighted guide countless times. I am able to discern the height and gait of the person guiding me. A blind person has to be attuned to these subtleties of movement to travel with ease. When it comes to clinical practice, Juliana applies these methods when examining the patient. The 4 diagnoses, looking, listening, touching, and smelling, have been emphasized in Oriental medicine because of the holistic nature of this form of medicine. Before I make a differentiation of a particular condition, I determine how a person walks into the treatment room. I am not just considering the gait, but also the way in which the feet move. I complete a thorough intake and listen not only to what is said, but also the quality of the voice. I feel the meridians and skin and palpate for any unusual findings in texture, temperature, pattern of hair growth, dampness, dryness, depressions, hardness or softness. I palpate the hara, or abdomen, in a similar way, paying close attention to the areas of the hara that correspond to the yin meridians. Finally, to confirm the clinical findings, the pulse is assessed. In comparison, I would say that her diagnosis of her patients seemed far more thorough than some appointments I've had with some GPs on the NHS, National Health Service. For example, in one appointment, the doctor spent the whole consultation typing down notes on the computer and only made eye contact once briefly when I entered his room, and never again.